Is next to the last session. Next week will be the last of this series in the Metaphysics of Music. This is session 10, and this session will deal with the Melanin Connection. So we're going to go over melanin, give you some basic understanding, hopefully give you some basic understanding of what melanin is, how melanin functions in the system, in life systems, and also its relationship to phonons or sound. Because the major two, melanin has the capacity to absorb radiation, be it photon, light, or phonon, sound, vibration, or radiation, have the capacity to absorb that energy and then translate that energy into molecules. It actually changes the molecular structure of various molecules that creates different and forms different types of cells that then impact the physiology and the psychology to create or maintain homeostasis or balance or harmony in the system. So through external stimulation then creates a energetic excitation that the melanin then modulates or modifies according to what's appropriate to keep the system in harmony in its drive to maintain harmony. So we're going to talk about that and talk about how melanin is the organizer, is being identified as the organizing molecule of life, which is a critical element. Because if you just, again, remember the keys, because I was talking about African American people and the role that African Americans, but that black people play in the human family, and the key factor we have played historically in terms of being the originators of civilization and the key functions or systems of civilization, and then African people being the melanated people, and melanin being the organizing molecule of life. What would that tell you about African people? So to the degree that we are organized will be to the degree that the human family become organized and in sync with cosmic harmony. We can get off on that. But anyway, so I have a number of handouts we'll pass out, and we'll kind of go through that. Next week we will kind of do a summary of all the major topics we've covered, and that'll bring this cycle to a conclusion. Understand it's just a introductory to the material. We could be here 4 or 5 years going into detail on all this information. So we'll start off. Okay, we have this piece is I took this handout out of Melanin, the Chemical Key to Black Greatness by Carol Barnes. And she has the book in the back right there, a few copies of the book. So I'm just going to touch on some key ideas, and then we're going to go into some other material. So major organs in the black human that contain high concentrations of melanin. But before that, I need to really go into what is the definition of melanin. Okay, here we get into this. The second series of handouts that I handed out came from an article. Really was a medical hypothesis paper that was published by F.E. Barr, who was a part of the Institute for the Study of Consciousness in Berkeley, California. This paper is entitled, it was published in 1983, and it's called Melanin, the Organizing Molecule, which you have on your first sheet, although this copy kind of messed up a little bit. So I'm going to start off with this one, and then we'll go into the other one. It says, the hypothesis is advanced that neuromelanin, in conjunction with other pigment molecules such as the, and I don't know all these medical terms, isopentanoids, function as the major organizational molecule in living systems. Melanin is depicted as an organizational trigger capable of using established properties such as photon, which is the electron, and phonon. Photon is light and phonon is sound conversions, free radical redox mechanisms, ion exchange mechanisms, and semiconductive switching capabilities to direct energy to strategic molecular systems and sensitive hierarchies of protein enzyme cascades. It's talking about biochemistry. In terms of melanin has the capacity to trigger various properties in these different systems that generate and form the operation of living organisms. Melanin is held capable of regulating a wide range of molecular interactions and metabolic processes, primarily through its effective control of diverse covalent modifications. When you're talking about covalence, you got to think about the atom, right? And the various electrons that are traveling around the nucleus and orbiting around the atom. So the ion, see, you can change the ion, like say if an atom is got, say, 5, various biochemical changes would change the ion, and I'm not a physics, I need to go back and study my chemistry and physics. It changes the valence, right, or the properties of the electron that will then allow for electrons to either add or leave the orbits of atoms, which then changes the atomic structure or weight of the atom, which then changes how those atoms unite or bind together, and the uniting or binding together of different atoms creates all the different substances that exist. So melanin has the capacity to trigger changes by either bringing in a different substance, which is really biochemical substances, that have biochemical reactions that changes molecular structures. So all your organs, skin, hair, everything is made up of various molecules or various molecular structures, which then means that melanin has the capacity to then alter physiological and psychological responses and systems. Okay. It says to support this hypothesis, established and proposed properties of melanin are reviewed, including the possibility that neuromelanin is capable of self-synthesis. Again, remember, understand, or try to hold on to key ideas or key words. Hold on to these ideas of these words in the context of all the different information that we've been getting, because similar key ideas or key words then relate to common kinds of processes. So here you have, and all this stuff we think about Memphite theology, because it says melanin is projected to have the capability of self-synthesis. It can synthesize itself. That means it can create various things out of itself, which is who in the Memphite theology? It's Atum. Because the principles upon which allows melanin to do this is Ptah. Because Ptah is the heart and tongue in all things. So it is the universal principles upon which all things exist. Now, using that principle, that capability, Atum, by contacting Ptah, then took that capacity and used the capacity to create out of itself. I'm just trying to show you, or trying to demonstrate, how ancient so-called fable or mythology was actually scientific principles couched in a mythological or symbolical form. And if you can then really understand the true significance of the symbology, you actually see scientific principles or the principles of nature reflected, which then means that ancient people also understood these cosmic, celestial, or organic dynamics, and that the civilizations were based upon these principles or laws. Now, it is also saying that the basic molecular structure upon which life is organized follows these processes, which then goes back and reinforces the principle of magic, right? Qualities of entities, human and divine, are distributed throughout their various parts, and contact with such entities releases those qualities. So that means that divinity exists in you through the operation of your own system, and then by man knowing thyself, or humans knowing thyself, deeply knowing oneself, you then know the universe. Anyway, so it says, two melanocentric systems, key molecular systems in which melanin plays a central, if not controlling role, are examined. One, the melanin purine pyridine, or what is that? Pyridine covalent modification system, and two, the APUD, or diffuse neuroendocrine system. So we got the endocrine system. Endocrine system moves the endocrine glands. Endocrine glands are connected to the cerebrospinal system, which then is directly connected to the chakra system. And we talk about various musical sounds and tones activate or stimulate different chakras. So if chakras are also connected to the endocrine system is controlled or governed by melanic or melanin system, there is a relationship between melanin and sound and melanin, and melanin has the capacity to absorb radiation, be it light or sound, and translate those radiations into molecular changes in the physiological and psychological systems in the organism. Really. But you know, because of our lack of grounding in the basic sciences, when we talk about these things, you know, it's like it's heavy, but we don't know how heavy it really is, because we really don't understand the processes, you know, in terms of basic sciences, you know, of biochemistry, chemistry, biology, anatomy, physiology, and then electronics in terms of electromagnetism. And in the system of similar arts and sciences, the exoteric is the first level before you go to the exoteric or metaphysical. Because the physical is a reflection of the metaphysical. So, and what am I saying that for? I'm saying that we need to study, pick up some basic books on basic sciences and read them, so I can read other stuff, you know. Stuff on electromagnetism. You gain so much from studying electromagnetism and also some of the basic systems in physiology and anatomy. So it says this article altogether with a companion article on melanin and the mind-brain problem, and I have a small extract from part of that article. The major hypothesis advanced here is that melanin in conjunction with other pigment and pigment-related molecules, such as the ubiquitous isopentanoid polymers, function as the most significant organizational molecule in living systems through its effective in vivo. That means in vivo means in the living system. You have in vivo and in vitro. Vitro is when they have them in laboratories and they try to have them in test tubes, like test tube baby. That's in vitro. They take it out of the living mother, put it in a test tube, and try to reproduce the same environment as the human environment or the living organism to try to observe how it works. So when you get into this, it may not be in here, but it talks about here certain functions
you can only, melanin, when it's taken out of the living organism and tried to be observed in vitro outside the living organism, appears static. Because there's certain interconnected relationships in the living organism that are necessary for it to function in its true capacity. This is like Western medicine, they extract various aspects of herbs and say, well, this is the essential part, but there are various trace minerals that are connected to that really allows it to have its full impact on the living organism. So anyway, so he talks about how, and I said that to say, so that in the research, because they try to research this in a test tube in the laboratory, and then they develop their hypotheses or their conclusions based upon this external observation, they will not see all the real characteristics of it, because it will not express itself totally outside of the market. But yet they will come and say, well, this is what it is, and thus they limit many of its other capacities because it's not observable outside of the market, which means you have to be a little bit more critical in terms of what you accept based upon just the material or linear investigation. But anyway, it says, so it's organizing molecules in living systems through which it's effective in vivo, that's in the living organism, control of the vital and diverse covalent modifications crucial for both physiological and psychological activity. And so valence is when you take an atomic structure and you have a number of magnetic fields that have a particular spin frequency. Atom has so many electron shells or so many electrons in that. You add all that energy up, you come up with an atomic number. So then melanin has the capacity to modify the covalent structure of molecules to then alter the molecular structure of the molecule. Now, there are also, if you then take this analogy to the social level and look at the role that African people play in society, what do? We modify social systems, the various components, be it economic, art and culture, be it scientific, athletic, religious, or etc. African people play a similar function in social order. We have the capacity to modify the organizational structure of these entities based upon the type of energy that we express, be it positive or negative. So this also is telling us something. It says, to organize a system is to arrange or form its elements into a coherent, functional whole. How such organization takes place within living systems, such as the cell, remains a central question of biological research. At the molecular level of cellular organization, nucleic acids have programming control over the numerous dynamically responsive proteins. You know, proteins are the building block of life. So it also will get you to understand how important diet and nutrition is. Because if your system doesn't have all the necessary minerals and vitamins to create these various molecules, then the system is going to be deficient, which means it won't be able to fulfill its total capacity or potentiality. Says, however, we propose here that melanin functionally organizes these original raw proteins which result following translation from the nucleic acids by controlling the subsequent post-translational covalent modification. So basically the nucleic acid is like DNA and RNA. which are the programmers of genetic code, which then informs the various cells on who they are. And then they then go and coagulate or form themselves based upon that DNA message into the various organs, hair, eyes, nose, nervous system in terms of your nerves, etc. So really, understand what we're saying here. And melanin does this by modifying the covalent modifications, the valence level. So it says melanin has the possibility that change these raw proteins into active proteins. This protein activation in vivo in the body occurs via melanin directly and indirectly controlling the mechanisms of covalent modification, including peptide cleavage, phosphorylation, methylation, glycosylation, adrenylation, uridylation, polyamination, acetylation, and transsulfuration. So you're really looking at all the various minerals in terms of adrenals and glycosylation, the sugars, the urination, etc. Our hypothesis that melanin and perhaps the isopentanoids interact closely with the nucleic acid and perhaps the glycosaminoglycan to form a control axis for living systems. And I'll finish up with this. It says, the hypothesis that melanin is the basic organizing molecule within the vivo system can be supported by at least 4 major lines of research and argument. First, at its remarkable set of properties, or its remarkable set of properties as a unique polymer, biopolymer. Bio is biological, polymer is almost like polyrhythmic in its capacity to transform and bind into various forms. In addition to being an extremely efficient light photon-absorbing molecule, exhibiting extraordinary photon-phonon conversion processes, converting light and sound into various processes, melanin transduces both acoustic and electric energy fields. Acoustic is sound, and electric energy fields. And it can generate enough heat to affect metabolic processes. In addition to responding functionally to both light and sound, and being abundant in both the eyes and inner ears, melanin and neuromelanin, the form of melanin found in the central nervous system, is located in highly strategic functional regions of the central and peripheral nervous system, including the midbrain reticular formation, substantia nigra, and ventricle tegmental area. The pontine reticular formation and locus coeruleus, the autonomic and sensory ganglia, the glia cells, and glia cells. In vitro studies, that means out of the body, have shown that melanin functions as an amorphous semiconductor without physiological ranges of neuronal electrical potential. Amorphous is almost like it can go through membranes, right? And all cells and all systems are usually encased in a membrane, and the membrane then being amorphous allows certain biochemicals to come in and holds other ones that doesn't come out. Really based upon a covalent or electromagnetic frequency that then its frequency is at a equal or similar capacity. It allows that those cells or those molecules to permeate the membrane. So then melanin is amorphous in terms of it can permeate all the various membranes and has the capacity to either stimulate or retard the excitation of the atoms in the molecules, which then changes the valence, which then alters how the various atoms bond together, that then creates the molecular structure of a particular organism. Good. And I'll finish up here. Ions is like when you ionize. Again, I need to go there. Really a good book. I had a good book on that. A good book on that is Energy Matter and Form. We talked about that in terms of ionization and ions. Because basically, when you start, I think when you add or subtract an electron from the atomic structure of the atom, it then either can become, I'm not exactly sure, I need to look at that, because it can either become ionized, it means more excited, or it becomes more stable. So usually when you ionize an atom, it becomes more excitable and less stable, which means it can then change easier because the electrons are in a more excited state, in a less stable state. But again, I need to get the exact definition.
The ions is the atoms and molecules themselves, either with electrical or positive ion or negative ion.
Okay.
So the atom, if it loses that from that quantum, it becomes a positive ion, or it's seen as positive charge. It keeps the positive charge, it becomes positive ion.
Okay.
It gains a negative
electron.
It gains electron, it becomes a
Negative ion.
ion.
Okay.
So it makes it excited when you can give off a little.
It'll release that electron easily. Right. Becomes less stable.
Any state of electron, a negative ion or positive ion, it's not stable.
Okay.
It's not effect. You don't see the effect that went from positive ion externally. And usually like internally.
Okay.
You see the positive ions, how unhelpful they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right. That's right.
Unhelpful.
Right.
Because if you can get to the body and affect take away the charges or affecting the body.
Which is the more vivifying or stimulating. The negative ion.
Negative ion
Right.
is more stimulating.
Right. Because I know in a positive ion environment, bacteria and viruses can really grow in a positive ion environment, where a negative ion environment reduces the capacity for bacteria and viruses to grow. Negative ion environment stimulates healing and rejuvenation at a faster capacity, where positive ion reduces it. Is what? I'm not sure. He was looking at the word poison. Right, yeah. He was looking, I had never, I had never done it like that. Right. But positive ions are really generated in high quantity around bodies of water. Like after rainfall and natural, when you have flowing water, it really generates a lot of positive ions. That's why after the rain, you go outside, it's like a kind of a stimulating environment. When you go to the sea or go to the lake, it has a very stimulating response on the body. Plants also create an environment of more negative ions, not positive ions, negative ions are generated by water. Where synthetic material and air conditioning systems, they strip the electrons away and create positive ion environments. How we get sick buildings and people have all kind of allergies and all kind of things. Right. When they have the Santa Ana wind brings a heavy concentration of positive ions. You have all these energetic reactions because you have these intense air currents full of positive ions. Okay. Thank you. Furthermore, again, we're kind of getting technical, but I really just want to share this with you because, I mean, you can really start seeing how profound life really is and how the way contemporary society looks at things is so anti-life. Because really most of all these synthetic materials, synthetic foods, synthetic products create an environment of positive ions, which is really negative in terms of toward a healthy condition. It's almost like it's anti-life. Here, let's finish up. Well, quickly, let's go over the rest of these. So furthermore, melanin can continuously produce and scavenge highly reactive free radicals. It simultaneously oxidizes one substance while reducing another, and function as remarkable cation exchange polymers. able to bind and release a full range of strategically functional metal ions. So then if you just follow the issue of creating ions, which then stimulates atoms, then melanin can strategically release ions into an atom to stimulate it, or subtract ions from another atom to sedate it, and thusly modulate human systems, because everything is based upon initiation and reception, or active and passive. So now you're actually seeing the trinity, not the trinity, but the dichotomy operating in the context of fundamental living systems. Which go right back to acupuncture, acupressure, in terms of either sedating or stimulating your energy field through various types of pressure. Thing the herbs do, they either will stimulate or sedate the various systems in the body. Again, just trying to show you how this consistent theme operates through all these things. We're looking at astrology and astronomy, we're looking at number, we're looking at geometry, we're looking at music, and we talk about the ascending and descending scale and the point of mediation, creating harmony. So the same processes are functioning here, because the melanin then would either sedate or stimulate the various molecular structures to maintain the harmony of the body. And then when we get over in this next piece, you'll see some other relationships in terms of how the human body is not only in the environment of our immediate environment, we are also connected to our cosmic environment. So they also are receptive to the changes on an astronomical level. That then would also then stimulate various hormonal changes that would have both a physiological and psychological response. Then will impact behavior. The next page says the fact that melanin is the most primitive and universal pigment in living organisms present since the inception of life. Which makes its hypothesized organizational role particularly important. In searching for a basic organizational molecule, it would make sense to identify a primitive polymer which appears early in the evolutionary process and which subsequently developed an impressive functional repertoire. As the paper will show, melanin and neuromelanin presents itself as a singular candidate for such a role. And what I am also proposing is that then this same function that melanin plays in living organisms is the same function and role that African people play in social organisms, which is social systems. And so to the degree that we do not function based upon our original primitive universal orientation, will then also be a direct function of the disorganization of social systems, which then places a responsibility on African people relative to their role in the human family. Second, melanin seems the principal organizing molecule because of an impressive body of circumstantial evidence, especially because of its participation in what are described here as melocentric molecular systems. Two of these systems analyzed below are: one, melanin's close connection with the purine and the petadyne and their functional derivatives, which regulate innumerable mechanisms of cellular behavior, behavioral control, and signal transduction. Melanin's integral involvement in the APUD or diffuse neuroendocrine system, and melanin's role in the diffuse endocrine system. So APUD relates to the diffuse neuroendocrine system. This APUD system can synthesize, store, and release both peptide hormones, which are crucial to such functions as memory emotion, motivation, and toxic responses, and amine neurotransmitters, which are crucial to neuronal data transmission, sensory input, and motor output. That's right. That's right. Neuromelanin, which is itself primarily polymerized from tyrosine and tryptophan derivatives, and such monoamine neurotransmitters as dopamine, what's that? Norepinephrine, right, and serotonin. And the serotonin is produced by daylight, and melatonin, I think what is it? Serotonin is produced in the daytime, and melanin is produced in the nighttime. And they're released in opposites. So then they're a function of the daylight, starlight, ratio. Because if we look at the solstices and the equinoxes, you have a constant transformation or change fluctuation between daylight and nightlight, which then has a direct stimulation on the production of neuromelanin, which can have a direct effect on the production of various hormones in the body. So you also then can see how astronomy operates, because astrological signs really represent the characteristics of the particular phase in these seasonal changes. So the characteristics of the sign are a reflection of the characteristics that will be reflected in the environment based upon environmental stimulation as a direct product of what? The Earth's relationship to sunlight and night. You probably can even go higher than that, because different stellar constellations which emit starlight, which is a form of radiation, then will also have a very subtle impact on the neuromelanin transmitters, which also, that very subtly, could also have a modifying effect on the production of various hormones in the body, which also then relate to what? Emotion, memory, motivation, sensory input, and motor output. Again, all this stuff comes together, and in the inner connectivity, it then is like kind of summarized in a particular quality, and then is expressed or stimulated in the body. So it says, melanin using such internal capabilities seems to function as an organizational trigger. Sensitive hierarchies of strategically arranged cellular protein enzyme cascades controlled by reversible covalent modifications, we can go forward or backward, and in turn presumably by melanin, appear to provide the means for instantly activating and powerfully amplifying both the signal response to and catalytic potential necessary for diverse cellular organizational tasks. Third, during embryological development, that means while the fetus is developing in the womb of the mother, melanin is present in every stage from the oocyte to the mature adult organism. In vertebrates, it grossly condenses during the embryonic development of the highly pigmented neural crest system, which also coincides with the formation of the neural tube, which is the development of the spinal column and the brain, and disperses to many strategic homeostatic locations throughout the body. So it's saying that when the sperm itself, the head of the sperm is encased in a melanic sheath, and when the sperm impregnates the egg then invaginates, and then it is then encircled or encapsulated in a melanic sheath. As it invaginates, it starts to then create the neural crest, which then also terminates or develops into the brain and the spinal column, through which all nerves upon which you get sensory stimulation come from. The nerves themselves are encased in a neural sheet. That means a thin sheet of melanin encases all the the nerves, that then creates the pathway for the transmission of the neurons through which one gains response to the environment. And melanin is a semiconductor, and they also say possibly a superconductor, which means it's able to transmit high levels of heat and maintain a low level of coolness, so it doesn't burn that stuff up. Now you can relate those things also to other characteristics of African people. The whole thing about being cool. It says, among the most notable of these are the central and peripheral nervous systems, the autonomic nervous system, and the disseminated yet intimately interconnected diffuse neuroendocrine system. These are all the key systems in regulating the operation of the human organism. This feat of embryological organization and development is apparently guided by an organizing flow of sustained direct current, generated at the cellular level and first dictated at the pigmented pole of the, what's that, ocyte or ocyte or cytid? Ocyte. My Greek is not too good. But understand the concept. Thing is, all the details you may not get, but just understand the major concept or major ideas. This sustained current is modulated by various mechanisms accessible to control by melanin that regulates ion flow and the electronic gap junctions connecting the embryonic cells. This is something. The fact that brain melanin or neuromelanin increases with ascent up the phylogenetic ladder, reaching a culmination in man or humans, gives additional support to the hypothesis that melanin is performing some as yet unrecognized major function within living organisms. The companion paper to this postulates melanin to have evolved in its organizational capacity from that of regulating cell tissue systems in lower organisms through regulation of molecular covalent modification to developing a highly sophisticated central nervous system, neuromelanin regulatory network in more advanced organisms, culminating in self-conscious cognitive mental capacity in humans. To me, that verifies when we're talking about how in the noon was resident all creation in a pre-created state, and that in the noon was potentiality, and then potentiality, the opposite of potentiality is actuality. So then the potentiality creates its opposite of actuality, which then creates a polarity. A polarity then generates electron flow. The first movement of energy out of the noon toward actuality was the first vibration or the first word, which contained in its energy field the prototype of all possibilities, because that was the one out of which all things then created, as life is experimenting with all its possibilities, trying to move to fulfill its total capability. So as you contact the oneness in yourself, it then, once you contact that aspect of yourself, it then becomes the basis for multiple creative genius. Because all things in the created world are a function of the one thing. So once you can connect to that oneness, that unique aspect of yourself, you can then create multiple kinds of creations that reinforces the importance of meditation or communing with self. I think we were talking about, which one was that? It was one of the sessions when we were talking about, I went into Jung's piece on 2 essays on analytical psychology, and we talked about the whole issue of communing with one's own daemon or one's own inner self, getting to the level that one can actually hold a conversation with your inner self or your soul, which they call having knowledge and conversation with one's holy guardian angel. But anyway, again, I'm just trying to show how all of this stuff is interconnected. It's all interrelated. And by understanding the different aspects of the thing, when you then come into contact with a key word, it should stimulate these various pathways to these other key ideas, which should bring about more energy and awareness of the one idea. That's why I say, remember those key words. And fourth, he says, melanin may function as the primary molecular organizational agent in an evolutionary process that bridges the molecular, cellular, and embryological neural systems levels. The presentation of an evolutionary process theories, which we feel appears to integrate successfully our new understanding of melanin, is, however, beyond the scope of these two introductory review articles. It should be noted here that what may be described as a theory of evolutionary bioprocess, an extension of a more general process paradigm developed by Arthur M. Young, gives both added theoretical support to the observations made in these papers and, more importantly, illuminates the theoretical issues that lie ahead in the future of melanin research. Now, the book that goes into that is called The Reflective Universe by Arthur Young. This is the same book that we were giving, talk about evolution of consciousness. It's the same piece that outlines, when we talked about, is that whole thing about abstract thinking. And then we start to entertain and deal with abstract concepts, abstract ideas. And as your mind struggles to try to come to grips with these abstract ideas, what actually gets more accelerated is your intuitive mind. Because if you deal with these abstract ideas, certain key concepts or ideas that are consistent start to resonate with your own inner self, and as you start to understand these things, it starts to activate your mental capacity to take it to another level. The etheric level is actually an energetic level that is really the foundation of all systems. It's really the intuitive level. What I was looking at is the diagram in here that talks about, and we have it on the board, it talks about coming from light to particles, to atoms, to molecules, to plants, to animals, and to humans or man. And what he talks about is that the evolutionary process that starts with light or pure energy, the ultimate goal is to gain a level of consciousness that is equal to pure light or pure energy, which means that your consciousness then becomes aware of and unites with the principles upon which rule the governance of life. So then you get into what are the key words? Illumination, right? Cosmic consciousness, halo, all those, those symbols, right? Light bearers, because the avatar is a bringer of light, a light bearer in concept. And then actuality, it shows how in 7 levels. So back to the sevenfold nature of things. And then the different levels have equivalents. But melanin is an outgrowth of the photosynthesis in plants. It is the evolution of that process into mammal organisms, or living organisms, or mammals, which was the animal level, which is the foundation for humans. And melanin is a molecule. So molecule is the 4th level of materialization. So from molecules and various combination of molecules, all other kind of plant life, animal life, and human consciousness is an expression of. But he also has a process theory here, which I'm not going to guess that's on the left. Anyway, so Arthur Young's Reflective Universe is a And if you really want to start getting into a lot of these other concepts and ideas, this is a great piece. I think he recently died too. But he did do a few lectures out at Manatee Hall's Philosophical Research Society out there on Law Students, which they usually may have some tapes of some of his lectures and possibly some of other printed materials. Okay. That. So we talked about what is melanin, right? Now the next piece, major organ in the human, in the black human that contain high concentration of melanin. We kind of really all went over it: the brain, the nerve fibers, the spinal cord. You have the pineal gland, the pituitary gland. What's that? The thyroid, the chorothoid body, the parathyroid, the thymus, the adrenals, the kidneys. I really kind of, because I didn't have like a copy of everything. If you go into the book, he goes over the heart, the liver, all the muscles, skin, the gastrointestinal tract, the arteries. He goes into the eye, how the retina and the iris, the actual cone that absorbs light are melanin based, and then convert the light into impulses that then are neural impulses that then register in the brain and recognize various light. In the sheet I gave you the ear because we were talking about sound. Basically this is all connected to sound because of music and sound vibration. But we talked about the outer ear has highly melanated. You have the eardrum is melanated, and the auditory nerve is melanated. And then in there, the coccus and the various little fibers, all are highly melanated, which means they're highly responsive to vibration and frequency, and have the capacity then to absorb that frequency and translate it into energy forms. At the same time, melanin has the capacity in that it is like a thermostat. It is measuring the relationship between the external environment and the internal environment. But all of this is relative to the purpose of evolution. So melanin then is then releasing or retarding cell or molecular formation to help stimulate the body or the organism to evolve itself. Now once we evolve to a level of registering stimulation in the form of consciousness, then it also means that it can translate itself into various forms of consciousness, be it dreams, intuitions, etc., that will help stimulate one to become more aware. Now at a higher level, if people are out of tune, it can stimulate behavior that can also then eventually push people to get back on track through the negative. It's what happens to us physiologically when we start eating a bunch of junk or whatever and start clogging ourselves up. And then we start getting the sniffles and we don't take heed. What happens? It gets worse, and eventually it'll put you in the hospital, and eventually if you don't heed it, you can die. Or you get so sick you say, oh, I'm going to never do that again, and then get back on the straight and narrow. It usually only lasts for a little while till you forget, so you got to go through it again. But what I'm saying is what is equal to the human organism is equal to the social organism, because the social organism is just made up of bunches of individual human organisms. So then on the next page, he has a diagram talking about how heat and sound actually creates a stimulation, energetic stimulation, that can then create different electronic states that then can actually create various physical and mental either order or disorder. So now that goes back until we talk about how different sounds and frequencies affect different mental states or different mental conditions. Either it can then stimulate, intensify, or retard that particular condition. But then when you put it relative to imagery, you can intensify the effect the imagery has on consciousness by the underlying musical composition that's connected to the imagery, which we talked about that. And then it talks about the influence of chemicals to produce excited energy states and ability to see in elderly black humans. The other thing that Carol Barnes talks about is that the molecular structure of melanin is almost very similar to mind-altering drugs, the molecular structure of drugs, especially like, the cocaines and the acids and the stuff on, not angel dust, but crack cocaine. Because the molecules are very similar, it has a stronger molecular bond. That means that black people or African people or heavy melanin people are easier to become addicted to drugs, and it's harder to get them off of drugs because of the tight molecular bond between the chemical and the molecular bonds in the system. So, there. Okay, now I have a couple more handouts, and then we will.
I wonder if all of it taken into consideration during the manufacturing.
Probably, because most of this information is in the medical field, and the scientific field has this information, so they know these things. I mean, like all the problems in society are known. You can go in the library and look it up. Stuff that's happening in education and health and all of it is already known. And it's been known for probably over 1800s or whatever. So this handout comes out of the issue of a mind-body bulletin. It was July-August 1983, volume number 8 of the Mind-Body Bulletin. It's interesting because this Mind-Body Bulletin was published by Marilyn Ferguson, and she's the author of the Aquarian Conspiracy. And basically what she was doing in dealing with the mind, she was looking at this mind-body. This is the brain-mind bulletin, not the mind-body. The brain-mind bulletin. But she was going around and doing like research and investigating a lot of research or cutting-edge research dealing with the brain and the mind. And as she was going around investigating and talking to various researchers and publishing, she started seeing these trends. And basically the Aquarian Conspiracy is the culmination of these trends. And in that book she really outlines this transition from an old paradigm to a new paradigm. I don't even know if the book is still published. It's still available to bookstores. But in that she really talked about how there was a phenomena happening planetary-wise in terms of individuals in all walks of life, all different parts of the globe, be it housewives or everyday laborers to scientists and politicians in various walks of life, were experiencing a paradigm shift in terms of how they related to consciousness, how they related to the world. And this was like not, it wasn't limited to one racial group or one gender or whatever. And some of the key ideas was that people were becoming driven by an unknown factor that was pushing them to break out of a conditioned orientation, be it that housewives started to go and become artists or started studying some other field that was totally unrelated to their past experiences, or that people that was heavily steeped in material science started going into metaphysical kind of concepts, or started becoming open to all just a different linkage between what was presently promoted as the known world, the way, to a whole nother paradigm. And a lot of this was being done, they said a lot of it happened as if they were being driven or called by some invisible force. And it talked about how, and I'm telling you this because as you start to get more involved in this kind of information, even for you to be moved to come to this information is saying something. And so then it becomes a part of a process, and a part of the process was that you were on the edge of a precipice or a cliff.
and you couldn't see. But all you knew or had the feeling that you was on the edge of some great abyss or divide, and something was pushing you to step off from the familiar to the unfamiliar. But your conscious mind was holding you back because you was afraid, because the old paradigm said you're supposed to know exactly where you're going, right? I go to school, I get this degree, I get this job, I get this paycheck, I get this house, I get this car, I have this family, I get to school. It's well sequenced. Well, the new paradigm was you had to base upon inner faith in your inner self, and that is going to lead you in the right direction. So the idea was, as people said, they didn't know why, but once they stepped off of the edge, and as their foot went down to the unknown, something was there to support them. And they just kept moving off to this. It's interesting because this is going on more and more all over the world, but you will not see it in the papers, you will not see it on the news, and it will not be reported, because energy follows thought. And as they make people aware of that, other individuals who are being confronted with this would start to become more aware of it and will try to start following it more, which then would start to then create a liberated group within the population, which then would start to break the chain. So anyway, the point is, one, doing this magazine led to the book, and the book really chronicles this transition. And people are coming to the realization of these metaphysical ideas that are resident in the ancient mysteries. So, let's go over this.
You talking about the New Age?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So this piece here is interesting because he talks about this, again, if you look at the key ideas, he talks about melanin being related to 4 systems, right? And that melanin was an organizing molecule. And molecules are related to the 4th level. And the 4 deals with the foundation upon which the other things are built, or in the resurrection of a thing. Because involution comes from the 1 to through the 3 to the 4. Once you hit the 4, that's the turning point where then you start moving on the evolutionary scale. And then we can get into a whole numerical thing, talking about the position of 1, 4, and 7. So, here. Then also, just looking at the diagram, that is a cross, which then also can relate to the 4 seasons. So I'm just trying to show how, if you start looking at the organizational structure of living organisms, the same patterns and the various metaphysical symbolisms are reflected in those systems, which then gives you some validation to the legitimacy of those symbols, because the symbols really represent processes or principles or functions. So then it can give you more insight, or the other thing can give you more insight into the meaning of the symbols. So then it talks about, in the second paper, Melanin and the Mind-Brain Problem. Barr proposes 4 major physical systems of the brain. The process of interactions among these systems may provide an illuminating glimpse of the long-sought mind-brain interface. His hypothesis, the neuromelanin-neuroganglia system, constitutes the major physical locus or physical location involved in mental organization. The unique properties of neuromelanin make it an ideal candidate for controlling the other 3 brain systems. Having demonstrated the organizing role of melanin in medical hypothesis, which is the paper we just went over, Barr proposed a set of relationships between 4 neurochemical families, 4 major brain functions, and the 4 types of psychophysical experience mapped by Arthur Young, see page 2. Now, in the noon was resident 4 pairs of pre-creation entities. Atum initiated creation by naming 4 pairs of himself. And basically the 4 pairs were a particular function in both his masculine and feminine, or active and passive capacity, which just goes into the binary system, right? On and off. So I'm just trying to again show you how it's all connected in the context of stolen legacy and Memphite theology. So you have an objective body, sensation. Oh wow. Do you recognize what this is? Objective body is in sensation. Objective mind is intellect. Projective body is feeling. And projective mind, decision and insight, recognition, choice, and purpose. What do you have here? Right, but what about them? Right, the 4 elements. Fire, earth, air, and water. Fire is intuition, which is insight, recognition. The emotional feelings is water. The intellect is air, and sensation is earth. The objective body sensation, the body of feelings, physical feelings, movement, intellect. Because basically earth is body, physical, water is emotions, feeling, air is intellect and mind, and fire is spirit and intuition. Because intuition is the voice of the soul, and the soul is the spirit in you. So the objective body, the movement and sensory perception mediated by the network of neurons via the neurotransmitters. Here's a key word. It says, in the title up here it says, neuromelanin may mediate mind-brain interface. What's the key word? Then where did that come from? Last week's presentation. The science of mediation equals a cornerstone of ancient philosophical mathematics. Mediation is simply the observation of the functions of mean terms. So we went into the relationship between 2 extremes and the mean term. A is to B as B is to C. And so then you have the ascending and descending, or the active and the passive, intersecting at a midpoint, which becomes the point of harmony or balance. So then harmony or balance is created by creating opposing energies that then create a mediating factor that rebalances the system. So then this goes into a force of healing, because if you understand which way the system is out of order, then you have to bring in the opposing energy to then bring it back into a state of balance, which is the whole philosophy of dialectics, which I think, what is it? There was a congregation in China that's coming to do tomorrow. I was talking about, but no, there's something about Mao and something else somewhere. I want to. No, I was talking about Mao. I was talking about Mao Zedong and dialectics, because the way the Chinese employed their revolution was the whole thing on dialectical historical materialism. But dialectics, because they also use I Ching, which is a system of dialectical understanding in terms of how the various hexagrams is made up of 2 trigrams of 3 and 3 of yin and yang interact with each other to produce change. But I want to go there. I'm just kind of went off on a tangent. Forgive me. So you have the objective mind or intellect, the mind of organization and memory storage, a matrix of concepts, plans, measured relationships, an analog system. It uses direct current, the glial cells, 90% of the brain, and is ultimately controlled by neuromelanin. You have a projective body, a body of emotional feelings, pain and pleasure, motivation and drive. It seeks satisfaction of its needs. It is associated with peptides such as endorphins and mediated by the brain regions that includes the pituitary, pineal gland, and the hypothalamus. The pituitary, the pineal, and the hypothalamus creates a higher triad in the brain that, when you activate those higher centers, creates opens up the doorway to spiritual consciousness. But also, if you look at this, the endorphins are those natural mind-altering chemicals in the body. But this is related to the body of emotional feelings, pain and pleasure, motivation and drive. So if we're living in a very painful, demotivated environment, then we will seek external stimulation by ingesting drugs that then creates pleasure and motivation, or at least seeming pleasure and motivation. Because people are high, they talk about all the stuff they're going to do and what they see and all that stuff. They come down, they stay in the same place they was. So they go back and get high again and think they someplace else when they in reality they're not. But I'm just trying to show you how, when you start looking at this stuff, you can then decipher what's going on and also create an antidote. And so then you have the projective mind, the mind of decision, insight, recognition, choice, purpose. It is associated with extremely delicate antenna-like projections from the membrane of the nucleic cells. These projections are astonishingly sensitive, responding to a single photon of light. Projective mind is mediated by the brain's deep limbic system and the cerebral cortex. Boss showed the two minds and their nervous system attributes as one pair of polarities crossed by the axis of the two bodies. So you have the mind-body connection. And you have two axes of both of the body and the mind that gives you that duality and the cross. Arthur Young, who characterized the four as particular and general mind and body, originally formulated the relationship through real and imaginary numbers. There is not just the dichotomy of mind and body, each has its own dichotomy. Young also characterized the points of the axis as purpose and plan, need and object. Which then, if you look at that, purpose, plan, need and object, which then that would be another presentation. We go into the reflective universe. He also then outlines how then, what is our purpose, or what is your purpose, and what's your plan. So then what do you need to achieve your purpose through implementing your plan, and then what objects do you have to get to satisfy the needs, to implement your plan to achieve your purpose. In this model, mind structures the physical system because melanin, the master molecule regulating the other systems, self-organizes and apparently self-regulates by its transformation of light. Itself considered to be the ground of being in both physics and metaphysics. And then light is knowledge. So then knowledge can transform you psychologically and physiologically. And different kinds of knowledge has different qualities, which then would stimulate different ideas, which would then stimulate different neural responses, which would then stimulate different hormonal changes in the system. So then you could actually then take certain ideas and impact those ideas, which the projected idea is usually either through sound or through vision, which is light. And then if you connect that with sound or rhythm and various colors, you can then modulate the various impact it has on the psychology and physiology of living organisms, such as human organisms, which is what is being done.
We just haven't had the tools to be able to analyze and evaluate what's really going on. We might know something is wrong, but we don't have the knowledge or the light to uncover this mystery. These qualities of mental experience correspond to categories in other fourfold systems. Barr points out in Aristotle, efficient, formal, material, and final cause. And we did that in Stolen Legacy. We went through that. In Jung, sensation, thinking, feeling, and intuition. In esoteric systems, earth, air, water, and fire. So then you also, in terms of personally, what is your dominant element? Are you a fire sign, a water sign, an earth sign, or an air sign? So then what is your particular mode of operation, or your dominant mode of operation? Is it intuitive, thinking, feeling, sensation? And what is the relation between you and others you're in relationships with? What's their element? Because certain elements are complementary and some are opposing. So fire and air complement, earth and water complement. That's thinking and intuition, or sensation and feeling. So then if you then also talk about then how certain rhythms and patterns that then also correspond to one of these fourfold factors. So then you could then implement certain types of music that talked about like the bass and percussions are more of the lower sensations. How the string instruments are more spiritual, intuitive. How the wind instruments, you had the wind instruments, and there was one other category which you had to memorize, affect different parts of the body, or different. Then it depends upon the theme in terms of how you put in the melody, the tones, the the rhythm, and the other aspects that makes up music that then modulate at a certain frequency and create certain responses at these different levels. The fourfold view with its corresponding nervous system dynamic provides a physical system that parallels relationships within the psyche. So what's true in the physical world is reflected in the psychic world, which then is reversed. What then is experienced in the psychic world is also a reflection of what's in the external world. And it's my contention that one then can go within their own unconscious mind and contact everything in the universe. Because there's no discontinuity or disconnection between the psyche and the universe. There's no disconnect between your physical body and the universe. Which means if you are sensitive enough, you could go inside your own self and know where we are in time and space. Because everything up to this point is resident right now. And everything that is to be is resident right now. Projective mind, the mind that decides and chooses, DNA or dominion mind, instructs the organizational memory system associated with melanin and the glial matrix. This organized and conceptual mind, based on its history and therefore its beliefs, affects the neurotransmitters and peptides. This is heavy here. This in turn shapes the physical and emotional body. So what does that mean to the people who don't know their history and are not following the beliefs that are consistent with their evolutionary process? This actually gives you scientific documentation for the basis of sovereignty. Because another people cannot design systems for you that will be in a harmonic response to you because of their historic experiences is not the same. There will be general systems that will be true because all humans have a common general history, but specifics, there are very unique differences in the different
races because of their own unique historical experience, which is the function of the unique environmental experiences that they had, based upon the actual minerals and vitamins in the food, in the land, in the various things you ate, in the plant life, in the different angle of the sun-light polarity, and all these things. Objective mind, the Melanin system, a complex data bank, also feeds information back into the projective mind, DNA. This may account for the apparent phenomena of genetic transmission of experience. This, along with the recent evidence of superconductive properties in melanin, also may help explain the mechanism for the M fields of Rupert Sheldrake's theory, the blueprint of prior experience accessible without limitations of time and space. Same thing I was just talking about. The feeling and sensing minds, mediated by peptides and amines through action, also alter the melanin structure. All the systems impinge on each other. Now, in this piece here, in another page, he has a diagram which I'm going to draw. So we have a chart on the top. The chart as a cross. At the top of the cross, you have dominion, which is projective mind or subjective. At the bottom, you have organization or objective mind. On the left, you have animation or projective subjective body. And on the right, you have combination or objective body. And then there is a line moving from up to the dominion or projective mind is activational. And then when it's below, toward the objective mind, is static. Going to the left, it has passively activated, and on the right is dynamically responsive. And then I guess now how this plays itself out is in the actual biochemical world is at the top you have the nucleic acids, at the bottom you have melanin, to the left you have raw proteins, and to the right you have amino acids. And then review what he says on this and come to a conclusion. It says the functional typology of the neuroendocrine system. So this is the typology of the way the neuroendocrine system. So you're talking about the melanin that's related to the endocrine systems, and of course the endocrine glands control all the hormones. Obviously, the activation and regulation of neuroendocrine homeostasis, keeping things in balance, is a vital function of living organisms. In considering the types of molecules involved in this organizational process and their specific functional roles, the following generalizations may be helpful. The nucleic acids may be considered to be the most advanced molecules for dominion molecules because of their total sovereignty over the production of proteins. The proteins in turn may be considered to be the serval, animational, or mobile effector molecules because of their dynamic, multifaceted roles, including the transportation of various molecules, enzyme, catalysts, immune antibody responses, tropic responses, emotion and motivational effects, gross muscular, as well as cytoskeletal movement. In this paper, we have developed the thesis that the melanins, in addition to the isopenoids, are the natural organizational molecules. This designation is primarily due to melanin's postulated control over the covalent modification of raw, functionally inactive protein, and hence the generation of the organized, functionally active protein response. So thusly, by different responses, melanin excites the raw material of the raw proteins and causes them to become activated. The proteins become the building blocks for the building of various systems in the organism in terms of various molecules. because the proteins are the actual physical building blocks of which the molecules are constructed of. So anyway, he's showing you how the processes that govern the operation of a physical organism are also reflected in this greater dynamics between the mind and the body in terms of these different relationships. In short, the nucleic acids exert the ultimate molecular ruling capacity, programming control over the numerous dynamically responsive proteins, while melanin is proposed to functionally organize these raw proteins by directly and indirectly controlling the various means of covalent modification, the ionization of various atoms, as well as by its postulated organization control over ion activation of enzymes. For example, all protein products isolated from living cells have been covalently modified by protein analysis from the larger precursor sequence encoded in RNA. Anyway, that's more technical. The neuroendocrine system, which appears to be present in the most primitive of cells and throughout the phylogenetic spectrum, as being up the spectrum of living organisms, dynamically functions not only because of the animational peptide hormones, which are responsible for emotion, motivation, animation, i.e. the subjective experience of memory value, which ultimately brings about cytoskeletal or gross muscular movements, which means as these certain hormones are stimulated or released in the body, they create emotional, motivational animation or subjective experience or related to memory, which then stimulates behavior. All this stuff is biochemical, which is very scary, because what is the next frontier in health field? It's bioengineering. So they're talking about going back into the nucleic acids. Look at this. They're talking about going here and starting to manipulate this, which will then trigger the response here to organize this to then produce the combination. So then they're talking about here, dominion. Biological warfare. So,
they go deep into biological warfare. What about eugenics?
What is eugenics?
Eugenics, regulation of advanced species through DNA mutilations, crossbreeding.
Yeah, that's biology.
Yeah.
That's biological systems.
Yeah, they organize the DNA.
Right. Well, that's what we're saying. The nucleic acid. The nucleic acid. That's what DNA is. Right. It's the basic program that signals how the molecules are to organize themselves. So if you get a perverted consciousness that's manipulating this stuff, with the signals that they're going to be generating, that's some scary stuff.
Well, what could possibly come of that?
What could possibly come of it?
Yeah, what horror could come of that? The manipulation of that?
Well, I mean, you could actually, if you talk about then controlling the release of hormones that govern memory, emotions, feelings, values, you could create a emotionless, valueless entity that has no remorse, no mercy, no anxiety. Well, in one sense, a clone, but then you could genetically engineer the thing to where you say, well, okay, it won't respond to certain types of. It could be where it doesn't respond to certain situations. It doesn't have remorse. So we could just go in and just, okay, its order is to like just wipe out this town.
They're chasing for me. The Nazis. The Nazis. What they trying to do with it. The SF. You gotta be sure you don't have any like, any kind of Semitic blood in you and you appear this way, and this is their belief that, that the Germanic, tribes are more superior than that, and because, they can go in and kill a bunch of folks they did in their past history, you're gonna bring it out again, kill people without remorse. Obey orders,
They did that psychologically. Which
they were trying to do it the other way too.
Yeah, but I'm saying once they achieve that level, you could create, I mean, if you're talking about the negative side, you could create an entity that the only way you could control it would be destroy it, because it would not give up. It wouldn't know about we're overwhelmed or we're losing, because its whole program would be to just go and do whatever its mission. It doesn't have any feelings of values like that. Or it could create a whole group of individuals who believe that they're the workers. So their whole existence is just to work the mind, to do whatever. Because in here you also then can manipulate memory. So you could genetically encode certain thought forms to where you have a thing thinking that it's whatever. So again, all these are possibilities. I mean, it's possible it's possible. Now, if they achieve it or not or whatever, who knows or whatever. But I'm just saying, you're saying the possibilities. The possibilities just become limited by either the creative or diabolical thinking of those who are controlling it.
I hope somebody can back me up on this too. It's interesting that we talked about how if you really understand a lot of these theories and these applications, they actually put in the exam and just use it for the scripts. And I was just sitting and thinking about how, I do watch this one program, and it's Deep Space Nine, and how they had used a form of people called, they so-called called it Dominion, and they manipulated a group of genetic group of people to do the will of them. But the way they do it is that they use it by using a drug, which they call the white. Just like the nucleic acid, they actually bring a so-called drug to manipulate these people. They use the same concepts you're saying in the script to actually put it out on TV. It's like, you see that they actually have studied this information to actually put it into some form of media for us to, maybe not to say consciously, maybe subconsciously give us this information too. Not to say they give it to us, but they're basing all the information and controlling.
Well, a lot of the stuff, when you start dealing with science fiction, people then start studying a lot of the latest research and the concepts and ideas, and they translate those things into storylines. So people are out here reading stuff, Or you have another group of people who read a lot of metaphysical material and then use that material as a foundation to create stories off of it and put those ideas out there. Then you have those that read all of it, and start mixing it all up and creating all kinds of things.
What was interesting, they didn't really change the names too much, They left out their tongue to figure out really not.
But I mean, if I had not brought this article to this class, you would have never known it exists. And so of this small group here, how many is actually going to go further in terms of try to get copies of it, or go get the other, what I'm saying? And so who knows about it? In terms of the general population, they don't know nothing. They don't know nothing, right? And so that's a part of what we're trying to do. Is trying to expose people to these ideas and concepts so that